We don't always want to admit it, but there are many reasons why people don't like ads. A lot of people won't be shy about saying they hate them. In pursuit of progress, a good question to ask would be, what makes an ad acceptable, and who gets to decide? I'm Noor Naseer for AdTech Unfiltered. Today, I'm joined by Terry Taouss, president of the Acceptable Ads Committee, to unpack how the industry is redefining ad standards, not with publishers and advertisers at the center, but users. From banning disruptive formats to testing new ones effectively, we can get into why acceptable ads aren't anti-advertising, they're pro-better advertising. Let's get into this episode with Terry now. All right, well, Terry, thanks for joining me this morning.
Noor, it's a pleasure to be here.
I want to ask about all things acceptable ads. Let's start from the top. How do you define what an acceptable ad is?
The million-dollar question. So in terms of acceptability, I think about it as a spectrum. And I like to start off with the ads that are not acceptable. The disruptive ads, the annoying ads, the ads that everyone knows they don't like them. The ads that are a huge pop-up with an X that you can't click to close. The kind of ads that when you're in the office and you open a page, they autoplay and blast video. Those are the kind of disruptive, annoying ads that we know to not be acceptable. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got ads that aren't just tolerable, but that they're actually desirable. So think about the Super Bowl. Super Bowl ads. People tune in to the Super Bowl just to watch ads. I met someone yesterday and he said that he didn't go to the games. He'd been invited to the Super Bowl, but he preferred to watch them on TV so he could see the ads. So there obviously is a level of advertising that people not just tolerate, but want to see. And the work that we do is trying to figure out where that line lies. What we found is that a lot of times it depends on context. It depends on things like the creativity of the ad, and it depends on what the user's trying to do. So even the best Super Bowl ad, if you're at the airport and you're trying to rebook a flight that just got canceled, you're not interested in seeing it in that particular moment on your phone. You want to get to do what you're doing. So the concept of acceptability really depends on a bunch of factors, but mostly it stems from what the user wants, what the user's trying to do, and the ability to deliver that in that moment.
I heard that the Acceptable Ads Committee has been around for a series of years. Can you just remind me how many years?
2017 it was founded.
2017.
Yes.
Okay. And you were appointed in the last year. Is that correct?
This is actually going into my third year now.
It's your third year.
Third
okay.
year, yes.
But that you're the first appointed president who's paid a salary.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Why are you so special that you deserve a salary and nobody before you?
Well, Noor, I mean, the reality is that I'm the first president that's not only paid a salary, but the first president that's coming from outside of the ad filtering or ad blocking industry. So I was recruited into this position. I came into the position a couple years ago. And to be honest with you, coming from the buy side of ad tech, I was kind of familiar with the acceptable ads, but I didn't know that much about it. As I came into the position of being recruited for it, the more I learned about it, the more that it spoke to my values and what I thought was going to be important, not just for the industry, but for digital media going forward. So user experience obviously being one of it, but concepts like privacy, sustainability, putting the user first and foremost, and thinking about how we can have a sustainable open web. Those are all the concepts that, in terms of the conversations that I had going into it, were super important. And I guess, they felt that I'd be the right person to lead them into this next stage.
I sense, though, that when it was a voluntary position, because if you're not being paid, you're volunteering, that wasn't sufficient because somebody's going to have to do that on the side while financing their life some other way. But that must have been a term that they came to as well, that was necessary.
One of the most important things for the Acceptable Ads Committee is the independence of the committee as a nonprofit organization. And so a lot of the people that were previously involved had some sort of stake in the industry. They were involved in ad filtering in some way, including the prior president as well. So in order to move the AAC to a not that it hasn't been independent, but to really alleviate any perception of non-independence, I think it was important to recruit an independent president, as well as a lot of the committee members now don't necessarily have stakes in ad filtering, but they are very interested in user experience. They are interested in digital media, and they are interested in the rights of users.
Fair enough. Then you have a committee. It's not just you. You've got a team. Who decides? How do you recruit for the Acceptable Ads Committee?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the who really represents the how. how the committee works. So if you look at the digital media industry as a whole, you've got publishers who are creating the content that users want to see. They're creating the news and the viral videos and all the other stuff that we want to consume. You've got advertisers that want to reach users, and they're the ones that will pay publishers and fund a lot of that content creation. You've got intermediaries like agencies and ad tech companies that help facilitate that technologically. The committee is composed of stakeholders that represent each of those industry groups. So we have members that are publishers, advertisers, ad tech companies, of course, users, and each of those stakeholder groups have a representative. Those representatives sit at the table, and they are part of the process of how decisions get made. I think this is the important part because a lot of people don't understand this. Our committee representatives don't actually get to decide what is an acceptable ad. They get to determine the process by which we go about determining what constitutes an acceptable ad. So if there's a question as to, like we want to look at, for instance, a new ad format, one of our stakeholders might bring it to the table. A publisher might say, I'm really interested in this particular ad format. What do you think? The different stakeholders will be able to talk about it. They'll be able to debate it. We'll be able to talk about, does it provide value to advertisers? The user rep will talk about from the voice of the user. But at the end of the day, our process involves taking it to users directly, conducting really solid independent research that we commission, and letting users tell us if an ad is acceptable. So our committee members are vital. And, we've got great committee members who are volunteering their time to participate because they care deeply about the user experience. But at the end of the day, it's always the user that determines what makes an ad acceptable.
You said you take it to the users. Can you just expand on that? When something is being brought to users, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Ad refresh was a recent study that we did on ad refresh format. So these are ads that a publisher puts on a page that refresh after either a period of time or after a user-initiated action. It came to us from our publishing group. So some of the members in the publishing group wanted us to take a look at this particular type of ad unit because they thought it would be important, especially because publishers were under pressures with, the deprecation of cookies and whatnot. So we brought it to our committee. There was a round of debate as to what that should look like, and we decided to proceed with it. We commissioned research, which recruited 10,000 users across the world, 10 different countries, different demographics, indicative of the types of users that are using the internet in each country. And we created mock-ups of different environments. So we had a gaming environment with a single page where ads were refreshing on that page. And we had a long-form news article, again, where ads were refreshing on the page at different intervals based on different user interactions. And we tested users. So we actually had them perform in this environment, either play the game or read the news article, and then give us their feedback. Did they like this experience? Did they hate that? And then we rank these. And we've got a certain baseline, and all of our research is publicly available, so you can actually take a look at what that looks like. But that informed the standard as to how we felt about ad refresh.
I'm going to ask you also about the acceptable ad standard. What is it, and what are some misconceptions about it as well?
Yeah, so the standard itself is a set of rules as to what is permissible, what is deemed to be acceptable by the committee as far as digital advertising is concerned. The implication of the standard is that there are ad blockers, there are browsers that will opt in to using the acceptable ads standard. And if a user decides that they want to see acceptable ads, they will see ads that comply with that standard. The biggest misconception, I think, as far as both the standard and acceptable ads committee is that we are anti-advertising. And really, that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that having been in the industry, there was a lot of pushback as far as ad blocking is concerned. A lot of people in the industry felt like it was impeding their ability to conduct their business. And I understand that is a fair feeling, but it missed the most important point, which is why are people actually installing ad blockers in the first place? And they were doing so because they just didn't like the experience that was being given to them. They were being inundated with disruptive ads, annoying ads that they couldn't get away from, that they couldn't close. And so they were looking for a solution. And if publishers and advertisers and the rest of the industry weren't going to give it to them, they were going to find mechanisms to give it to themselves. The Acceptable Ads Committee and the standard that we have in place is really a way to kind of avoid a tragedy of the commons, where you've got publishers that feel the need to generate revenue because they're under intense pressure. So they'll cram another ad in there. They'll cram a more intrusive ad into the user's experience. The alternative isn't that users are going to accept that. The alternative is that users are going to choose the nuclear option, which is to block all ads. And so acceptable ads is a way to kind of bridge that gap, to ensure that users get the experience they want, but that advertisers and publishers and the rest of the people that are involved in the industry are able to generate revenue so that we can have a sustainable open web. The idea that, the acceptable ads is somehow anti-advertising couldn't be further from the truth. We are actually very much pro-sustainable advertising, very much pro-open web.
I think one of the problems for people may be that you're doing too much. Even when you're describing the process of having users doing the testing, and I don't know this for a fact, I'd have to ask you, but I don't know that many of the other regulative bodies are going to the same level of thoughtfulness of really ensuring that you're coming up with solutions that are appropriate for the marketplace. So let me ask you this question. Who do you think really hates or despises the Acceptable Ads Committee?
So, hate's a strong word, but if I were to kind of peg who hates the Acceptable Ads Committee, I think it's really folks on either end of the spectrum. You've got the burn it down crowd. You've got the people that are just anti-advertising whatsoever. They don't want anything to do with advertising. All advertising is bad. The idea that Acceptable Ads provides a experience that is better for users, but that still provides some sort of advertising for them as a non-starter. So I would say if, the militantly anti-advertising crowd probably hates that we're doing this. And then on the other hand, you've got certain parts of the industry that feel that, any sort of impediment to their ability to generate revenue, make a buck at all costs is a problem. They don't care about the user experience. Their whole goal is to just drive as much revenue by cramming as much ad units onto a page or, at the cost of the user experience. So I would say those two are pretty small constituents, but at the same time, they're also pretty vocal constituents. And I think they would probably be the ones that would be most opposed to what the Acceptable Ads Committee is doing. But at the end of the day, I think the broader industry, especially now we're working with, a lot of the regulatory groups, a lot of the big industry bodies, a lot of the big players in the industry, they see the value in what Acceptable Ads brings to the table. So overall, I would say, there isn't a lot of hate coming from the industry.
How do you meet the balance between trying to fulfill the interests and needs of advertisers and publishers while simultaneously recognizing the needs of users and just the internet using public?
Yeah, so that's built into our DNA. The way that the Acceptable Ads Committee has been structured is such that just happens naturally. So it's two things. It's our structure and our process. So in terms of structure, I talked about it earlier, but the fact that we have user representation alongside publisher representation and advertiser representation means that whenever we're making any sort of decision, those voices are always at the table. They're at the table at the initial planning stage. They're at the decision-making stage. We're constantly hearing in everything that we do from the publisher, the advertiser, and the user. So our structure has a big role in that. The second part is our process. I talked about the process of what that research looks like. Any decision that we make is going to be data-driven. To quote Jay-Z, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. All our decisions are based on what the data tells us. So while our representatives will help guide the questions being asked, it's the users and what they tell us during that research phase that decides what decisions are being made. So we're able to balance it by a combination of having the right people at the table and then also just, making sure that we're very rigorous and data-driven in our decision-making.
Yeah, love a Jay-Z reference. How does the AAC measure the success of the standards that you put forth?
First and foremost, the most important constituent is the user. So everything that we do revolves around the user experience. In terms of how we measure that, we do a lot of different things. Obviously, there's the user involvement in the research. Even after that, there's a lot of data that we gather from our partners. So we'll gather things like uninstall rates. We'll gather things like user comments and satisfaction on how they feel about the standard. These are all things that we take into account. If we make a decision with respect to the standard and we see a spike in uninstall rates, that flags a concern that we will look deeper into. We do have metrics that, to the extent that we can gather them, we're constantly looking at user satisfaction.
What does recruitment to the committee look like? Curious about that. And then a second part. So maybe I'm asking too many questions at once. What does recruitment look like? And what do you do when, I assume, a diverse committee comes to terms of disagreement?
So in terms of recruitment, we have two layers of involvement with the AAC. We've got our members, which belong to different stakeholder groups, and then we've got our representatives who are the voice of that particular membership group. It just makes it more wieldy for us to have, a single representative at the table rather than many of them. Our representatives usually sit for a tenure of 2 years on the board. Recruitment is really a pretty unique process because we want to have as many different viewpoints as possible, even within a particular stakeholder group. So as you know, ad tech, there are a lot of different flavors of ad tech. There are a lot of different types of publishers. We try to get people that are knowledgeable, not just in their space, but about the broader industry as well. Because this is a volunteer position for our representatives, they are committing a lot of their time and energy to this. They really have to feel, I would say, pretty passionate about the user experience in order to participate in this. And that comes through sometimes in disagreement, right? So we will get a lot of disagreements on the committee. I think that's natural. If we weren't getting disagreements, then we'd be doing something wrong. We would have way too many people thinking the same thing. So The intention with the committee is to make sure that each person represents their stakeholder group. So they're speaking on behalf of publishers or agencies or ad tech companies. But at the same time, they are also thinking about the broader needs of the industry. And so that sometimes results in disagreement. To the point I made earlier, we let the data resolve it. And that kind of is the final say as far as we're concerned.
No, you said earlier, Terry, that you don't hate ads and the AAC doesn't hate ads, but there are people out there who do hate ads and use the internet. And that has fueled, I'd say, the rise of ad blocking technologies that are out there. How do you combat that, or how do you deal with the fact that that has been this rise?
I think that when you see the rise of those nuclear ad blockers that block everything, it's indicative of the problems in the industry. People have a choice. They have a choice to see the ad experience. They have the choice to use a nuclear ad blocker, and they have the ability to use something in between that complies with acceptable ad standard. We're not so concerned about the nuclear option. We're more concerned about setting a precedent for the industry in terms of how it can move forward. Those nuclear ad blocking options are only possible because people don't feel like they have another option. If the industry is focused on the user experience, giving users the kind of user experience that, we talked about, not just tolerable, but desirable, there won't be an issue with ad blocking. It's when the industry pushes too hard in one direction that you end up seeing some of these. So our goal isn't to, necessarily be concerned about, nuclear ad blockers or any of that fundamental stuff. It's more about showing a way forward, showing a sustainable path for the open web that people should be following.
How do you ensure that the standards that you set are staying relevant in a world that's so constantly changing?
Great question. So the initial standard was set in 2017, and it seemed like it was a simpler time. The standard had to simply deal with some formats. Pop-ups weren't allowed. This is the amount of coverage on a page. That made sense for the time. Obviously, not just the digital experience on websites are changing, but the way that we consume digital media is changing. So we've got connected television, we've got wearables, IoT in devices in the house. All of these things are changing the way that we consume digital media. For that reason, one of the things that the Acceptable Ads is focusing on is evolving the standard towards a more principles-based approach. When you're simply a format-based standard, it's hard to keep up with the changes that are happening. Part of our move to a principles-based approach, and one of the things that we're focusing on right now is really around retail media. So retail media is a perfect example of how the standard didn't necessarily work as well to protect the user experience. In fact, in some cases, it degraded it, because if you've got a retail media publisher who has an awesome experience that involves huge product listings, but then they have to comply with the standard, those smaller ads that the standard requires actually makes for a worse user experience, right? So you've got the unintended consequences in that particular situation. So we've been speaking a lot with retail media, and we're using this as a test case to look at what a principles-based approach would look like. So we're not necessarily looking at imposing format rules, but rather general principles that publishers would have to follow. So that's part of the evolution, is how we intend to stay relevant. One of the things that I think is going to be super important going forward is privacy. Privacy is a very important issue for the AAC because it's an important issue for our users. And I think this is one aspect that we can actually be pretty unique in terms of how we approach it, because of the fact that we have direct user representation. We've got stakeholders from industry as well, but we also have users that are on the board, which I think is a pretty unique situation in terms of our ability to speak on privacy.
I'll land the plane on a question about what you're excited about for the future, or what do you think is the most important and interesting work that you are focused on for 2025?
Yeah. Privacy is going to be a super important issue for the Acceptable Ads Committee going forward, because it's important to users. And the Acceptable Ads Committee, we're in a pretty unique situation because we have direct user representation, but we also speak for stakeholders. A lot of industry groups, they speak for industry, obviously. And so they're making decisions that benefit industry, but a lot of times the needs of the user is not even being considered. On the flip side, you got regulators who are speaking for their constituents, but they don't necessarily have the technological experience or understanding of how their decisions might impact different industry. And so the AAC is pretty unique in that we can speak for both. We have the ability to speak for users. We also have the ability to speak for industry at the same time. And trying to find a balance is the most important thing. It isn't a clear-cut issue where, unfettered access to data is a good or a bad thing, or no data usage is ideal. There is going to be some sort of medium required. And I think the work that we're going to be able to do will shed some light on that and hopefully help guide the industry to a better way.
It's great to hear about all the important work that you're doing at the AAC and leading the charge for acceptable ads. Thanks for the time, Terry.
Thanks, Noor. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Terry Taouss, president of the Acceptable Ads Committee, for covering what makes an ad truly acceptable, how users are shaping standards, and why privacy, sustainability, and user-first design aren't just buzzwords, they're the path forward for a healthier, more open web. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoy this episode, share it with a colleague or friend, and subscribe to AdTech Unfiltered for future episodes. I'm Noor Naseer. More soon.